Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another amazing episode of the best darn show on the internet, the Sharon Show. It's myself and my lovely co-host Sharon, and today we have a returning guest, and we're very excited about it. But before we get into that, Sharon's going to read the quote today, and then I'm going to pull a card. Sharon?
Yes, I am. This quote is, "You must go in quest of yourself, and you will find yourself again only in the simple and forgotten things. Why not go into the forest for a time, literally? Sometimes a tree tells you more than can be read in books." And that is allegedly by Carl Jung in Letters of Carl Jung, Volume 1.
Amazing.
It's very, I feel like it's very Woodshop the Wise, very Lord of the Rings adjacent.
Well, it's a good thing because today we're going to be pulling our card from the Lord of the Rings deck.
No.
Yeah. So
I'm so excited.
shuffle up right now, and if we don't get a major arcana, I'm gonna look for one and pull it. But
Cody and I started watching The Hobbit last night.
so this is the Eight of Rings, which is oh yeah, great movie. Not as good as the book, but still pretty good.
I'm listening to the audiobook as well in the meantime.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. All right, I'm gonna pin this so everyone can see it. There we go. Eight of Rings. The rings represent what pentacles?
Earth or pentacles?
Yeah, pentacles. Yep. So you see 8 rings there, and so the Eight of Pentacles. It's a great card. Eights are always good because they represent like infinity and all that fun stuff.
Isn't that card about, because I used to get this card a lot. I can't remember if it was I was pulling it for you or I was pulling it for myself. But isn't it about like working on your craft and like at your skill and getting better at it and just perfecting it?
Yeah, it's basically like the level of mastery is the 8 because to me, pentacles represent what we do here in this realm, in the physical realm. And your craft, when you're working on it, you could see it through all the 1 through 7. And then when you get to the 8, it's kind of like a sustainability with the infinity symbol. So it's like you can keep going and going, but it's right at that peak point of perfection. And then 9 and 10 just kind of follow it along. And 10 is really about like passing it on to your predecessors, I guess, to your family or whoever it is, the people who are working on it next.
Nice.
But I do have another card. I'll make a quick appearance too. This one is the Magician.
Nice.
So this is oops. Here we go. I'm gonna try to pin myself again. This one is Gandalf. And you could see he's looking at the ring near the fire. So this is probably at the point where he was waiting for Frodo to come get the ring after Bilbo left it and went on his little when he went to take off after his party. But I like it because it has the knife there representing the sword. You see the cup in the other, I guess they would be rings. So it's all the elements represented there.
Nice. I'm excited to finish watching. We're about an hour in, so I'm excited to continue watching and read. I haven't watched it in a long time, and I'm terrible with movies, and I forget like everything that happens. I could watch it again like years later, sometimes even like months or a year later, and still be like, "Oh, I'm watching this again," like the first time.
I don't even remember if I watched. Were those 3 of those movies, the Hobbit ones too? Also,
no, that was just one, and it was 3 hours. Right? I think it was only one, and it's 3 hours long. Am I right?
Are you watching the animated one or the newer ones?
The newer, like the Frodo. Sorry, what's his name?
Bilbo.
Never mind. I forgot the actors.
The new ones are. There's 3 movies. They broke it up into 3. So
it's the Hobbits broke it up into 3 as well.
Yeah.
So I'm on the first one, and it's 3 hours long.
You got a lot to go. Yeah.
I got a while to go. So, okay, I'm excited.
Nice.
So anyway, we're amongst friends, so we're just like chatting away. We have Woodshop the Wise again today, And we have been chatting, kind of DMing each other too sometimes about topics that are near and dear to our hearts, which is just researching like history about religions and things like that. So Woodshop Nick has been looking into a lot of this stuff as of late, kind of digging back into it. And he can correct me if I'm wrong, but he had been doing a lot of this research many years ago, 20 years ago, he said, maybe. So he's kind of dug back in, and he wanted to share some things, and we're open to hear what he has to share. So without further ado, welcome again.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah. I want to preface this entire episode by saying that feathers may be ruffled with some of the things that I'm going to say. And if they are, I suppose maybe treat it as a test. Yeah, treat it as a test of your faith. Testing your faith is something that I think everybody should do. It's not my intention to persuade anybody to go any certain way. I am making absolutely no claims on what is truth or what is real. I am just presenting questions that I have had for the better part of 2 decades that to this day I have not found answers that resonate with me enough for me to actually believe anything with any level of certainty. So, and I'm not mad about it. I think that's what makes life fun. It's just if we don't have the ability to even talk about these things, I think that's where we enter a very dangerous space. When we let blind dogma take over, that's when we have holy wars where innocent people are killed, and humanity, I think, really backslides. So with today's talk, I just wanted to kind of go back into some of these older pantheons of gods and talk about some of the similarities between them, and then we can go from there and just talk about whatever. But this is stuff that I've found just fascinating. For many, many years, I have read many, many books. Behind me, there's a bookcase. All of those books are on ancient cultures, ancient religions. This was what my life was for like a decade plus, is just researching this stuff. So I had high hopes of creating a big like presentation for you guys, and then yesterday the day got away from me and I didn't. So I'm just going off what's in the old noggin here. So forgive me if I get any details wrong out there, people. Don't spiral about it. This is just I'm just pulling from what I've learned over the years. So what brought me to really going back and researching this stuff, because for the last 5 years or so I've been very into the Christian mindset, and reading my Bible and researching, and kind of just trying to absorb that, because funny enough, it's one of the last real religions that I looked into with any level of depth. I went down every other avenue prior to this. So it is fascinating for me to read the Bible, read, the apocryphal texts and stuff, and read like your books of Enoch and Jasher and Maccabees and all these things. There's a lot of wisdom in there, and a lot of questions are answered that are not found in your conventional Bible. So that's cool. But there's questions that need to be asked, that have been asked, and are often, especially within dogmatic Christianity, they're kind of brushed under the rug, or they are labeled as like heresy. And I think that's blasphemy, heresy. It's demons trying to influence you because you're asking questions. To me, that is the most dangerous place that humanity can be, where we're not able to even ask questions, because we wouldn't have been given the ability to think or ask questions if it didn't serve a purpose and we weren't supposed to use it. So that's my little opening intro. And if you guys want to add anything before we get going, go for it, because I'm going to just roll for a minute.
No problem. I'd like to say that I think it kind of encapsulates the whole parable of the prodigal son, where, you know, you go away from everything, you leave it behind. You're not happy because in the story that one of the sons isn't happy with his father and the way he's running things. He wants to go off into the world. And that's kind of like you probably started off when you were younger, being raised on these tenets of Christianity, and it just didn't make sense to you. So you went and studied all these other religions. And then by going to study all those religions, it just led you right back to Christianity. And now it's something different for you because you're perceiving it in a different way than it was taught to you. So I think that is crazy that that story is in there in the Bible. And then it's something that people, I think they just look at it as a fun story and they don't equate it to everything, you know, and other philosophers have said that too. They'll, I forgot who it was, but he says something like, I knew things had changed when I got home and viewed my home with different eyes, or it was like a different place to me, basically. So I think that's kind of what we're doing here. And I guess I can add further to what you were saying about ruffling feathers. And, you know, we always here at the Over Sharon show, I almost said Oven Sharon show, the Over Sharon show.
Oven.
I don't know what
it's gonna be an oven in here.
The coven. We're witches. They got us. Hurry up, run away. We always live by the those who know don't talk, those who talk don't know kind of Tao thing, where we are just here asking questions, and sometimes people's religion and what they have works for them, and they're able to live according to the golden rule, and, you know, go to work and do what they have to do and have a great time, and they don't judge other people. And they live great life. But some other people use these dogmas and they'll say that you have to live this way. And if you don't, then you're going to go to hell and it's going to be terrible and all this stuff. So we're not judging anybody's belief system here. We're just asking questions and going a little deeper and further. And we ask you to come along with us on this nice journey. And maybe you'll come back to your home not recognizing it also.
Yeah. And I would like to add as well, Brandon was talking about like the notion of the prodigal son coming back and then like looking at things in it from a different perspective than before. And it just makes me also think of like, we've done this before with like, you know, people that are like, call themselves truthers or whatever, right? That are seeking truth and wisdom and knowledge. And we go back and we'll watch a movie of, say, like people that went and watched The Matrix again with new eyes. Why? Because the first time they saw it, it was like, perhaps it was like indoctrination of like, oh, people at the time were like, oh, this is cool. Like, could it be that the world is going to be like this someday? And or could it, or what a crazy story or whatever. And you're just not aware of all the layers of truth that are hidden in there. So when you go and you watch it again with new eyes, it's it like a whole new world opens up for you, right? So I kind of see that this topic in that light as well, in that way. And I too did something sort of like that, where I wiped the slate clean on like all that I thought was true and everything that I was told was true growing up in church and things like that. And I did this, and I mentioned it in many episodes, but like back in 2020 is when that started to fall down for me, when everything started to crumble. And I realized that there were a lot of things I didn't know. So I was willing, fearlessly, because we also talk about this, like we don't want this to be, we don't want people to fear, right? We just like so many people have said, like Jesus and many people, the Bible even says like, don't fear, right? So we don't want people to fear. But I did that, and I was just like, okay, I don't want to fear. Please bring to me, God, bring me to whatever it is that is true and useful for me, wisdom, knowledge, and I relied a lot on that Bible quote, 1 John 2:27, where it says, like, the Holy Spirit is your teacher. You don't need another teacher. The Holy Spirit is within you and is your teacher. So that always, having read the Bible a few times right before the end of 2020, or before the beginning of 2020, by that time, that was one of the verses that stuck out to me. And I was like, there's something there with that. So to me, it's like, trust your intuition, trust your gut. That's God telling you stuff. So anyway, that's my little opening spiel.
I like that because, you went from being basically, we've told the story on the show before. So if you want, go back and watch all the episodes, everybody watch them all. And just, that's all you got to watch. That's it. Is that you went from being like a dogmatic Christian, and then you came into this other view that you have now. And I'm sure we'll get into that, but you never really lost faith. Whereas I came across some of this information and it was kind of dangerous for me. But of course I had to go through it because I became more of like an agnostic, or I guess like an atheist, because I saw, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this too, but the elements of control that are behind religion, I saw them really clearly. And so for a while, I just thought that we were just some random accident flying through space in a ball, and I'm like, oh, it doesn't matter then. I could just do whatever the hell I want. What does it matter if there's no consequences? I'll just go out and live my life. And my supreme thing was to make myself happy. It didn't matter what else anybody thought. I was just trying to have experiences. But then I had to come through all that folly. I had to get to a point where for myself that I knew that I was wrong, and I had to admit that I was wrong. So I think that's a lot of what this spiritual journey has to do with too, is just really admitting that you were wrong, and that maybe what you thought you believed before, you were believing it because it was out of fear, like you were saying,
Yes.
because you needed to know. And now I know that I really don't know. I just have an idea. I'm not
Right.
really sure about anything, but I could point my ways toward things. And I know some things that are true, definitely true to me. But yeah, I think that's a really important step, is just admitting you were wrong.
Yeah, definitely humility is a big part of it, because when you're arrogant and prideful, that's definitely even the Bible talks about that. The Tao probably talks about it. I can't remember which verses, but like, yeah, arrogance and pride are not helping people out.
Yeah. And when we talk about systems of control too, one other thing I want to say really quick before we jump in is that we're not blaming other people, and we don't think we're victims, because all this stuff that was pushed on us and all the things we did in the name of God and all this stuff, and the control, if we see the control system, we're not angry or mad at it. And one of the reasons really is because these controlling religions, they still give you the truth. They still give you the Bible, but they just use their interpretation. But it's still on you if you go along with their interpretation, because if you just read the story of Christ and model your life after that, I mean, you're going to be fine. You don't need to know all this stuff. I still suggest watching the Sharon show because it's the best darn show on the internet. But you wouldn't even need to watch this show. You could just live your life like Jesus and you'd be great. So that's where it really takes the victim out of it. None of us are victims, and we don't believe that anybody, even if as staunch as they are in their dogma and they would call us devil worshipers, we don't think they're victims either. They're just on a path to figure it out for themselves, because unless they figure it out for themselves, they're not going to know. They'll just be following our dogma, the oversharing dogma, and they'll be like, oh yeah, they said it, so it must be true. No, it's more about realizing it for yourself.
Love it.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
So to jump into this, the reason why I jumped back into this stuff, especially recently, the last few months, is because reading through the Old Testament, there's a lot of stuff that I had read prior to this that kind of gave me different eyes to see the Old Testament and who Yahweh is. And reading through it again, in earnest and just digesting it over the last 6 months or so. We'll just ruffle some feathers right off the jump. A lot of the things that I see from the Old Testament God are not things that resonate inside of me with an all-loving creator. And this is something that I have spent probably since I was 7 or 8 years old, and I started learning these stories, really trying to come to terms with and asking questions that were never answered. And it hits a point eventually where you go, it's time to just trust my intuition. It's time to let go of all the dogma and the fear of judgment from others and the fear of being outcast in society, and just trust my own intuition, because the God, the Father that Jesus talks about, does not come off as somebody who requires tens of thousands of animals to be sacrificed and burned. It's the whole thing is weird, the idea of a chosen people, this one group out of all the world, all of the people in the world. This is the chosen people. Everybody else can, get fucked. These are God's people. Everybody else is done.
Yeah.
Never
Made
sat
sense.
well with me. It never made sense.
Yeah.
And so I think that I think that a lot of this is kind of what sparked me to, because Brandon is absolutely correct. I grew up in a home that was not dogmatic Christianity, but it was, we were Christian, and it kind of pushed me away from it, because I go, this is absolutely horrific behavior. When you read about the plagues sent to Egypt, especially the killing of all the children, and I go, that's not who it's not who I pictured God as a child. Like when I was a child, I did not picture God as somebody who would come through and kill, firstborn children. I didn't picture him as that at all. God was supposed to be good and loving and helpful, and he was supposed to provide grace and mercy, forgiveness, all of these things. He was supposed to be a teacher, and he was supposed to be somebody who you were, even before I understood the ins and outs of religion or Christianity or anything, just as a child with a very basic understanding that there was a creator. The goal was to get home to be with the creator again. And as I grew older, I started going, why would I want to go home to somebody who would do this to his own creation? And then you get a little bit older and you see, some people are very blessed and they don't see this. I saw it within my own home. You see parents who are under, list the variables that cause stress, and they're enduring them, and then it gets taken out on the children. And so I go, well, that's strange. There's a parallel there, because that causes trauma. And so then that led me down this road of questioning, if God is all powerful, all knowing, all loving, then he's got to know that he's going to be inflicting some very serious trauma on people by some of the things that are being done by him. And then you go, well, why would he do that? And it just, it opens up this Pandora's box of questions that I've taken, 20 plus years and still don't have answers for. But the one question that is most important to me is, who is the creator? I think that's very important. I think that we as people get hung up on just trivial stuff. And you see that especially right now. There's like a huge wave happening right now within society of people fighting which religion is right. And then within that religion, which denomination is right. And then within that denomination, what dogma is correct. And it's fractal and it's annoying as shit. And it's not how I operate or how I think at all. So I think it's a good time to go back and revisit some of these questions of who is God? Like, who are you praying to? Because most people don't even understand who they're praying to. And it's shocking when you realize the history of it. So let's
Have
go.
you have you ever seen that video of that guy who's asking, I think it's like a stand-up thing, and he's talking about how he met some guy and he's like, "Oh, what religion are you?" "Oh, I'm Christian." "Yeah, me too." And then he's like, "Well, what kind of Christian, or you Catholic or are you Protestant?" "Oh, I'm Protestant." "Well, what kind of Protestant are you?" "Baptist," or, blah, blah, blah. And then they're like, Baptist or something. And then he starts breaking it down. Southern Baptist, or,
It just goes
and
and
then it's
goes
like
and goes.
Reformed Southern, blah, blah, blah. And he just like goes and goes and goes and goes. And at the very end, they're like almost exactly the same till the very end, where they're just different by like one thing. And then he's like, "Go to hell," or like he sends him to hell because he's a whatever.
Yep. Yeah, and that's literally what's happening. And
It's terrible.
I think to me that shows like human ignorance and just straight up stupidity. Because it's like you're fighting about these details, but you're not asking the big question of who is God? What is
Exactly.
God? What is
Exactly.
our purpose here? These
That's
questions often don't get talked about. And I think like that's a natural reaction because these questions are just life changing and ego shattering and terrifying in their own right because we don't know anything. All we have is what we think, and we can't even trust our own thoughts a lot of the time. So, um, I kind of, the way that I think about it when thinking about who is God and then looking at all these other religions and people fighting about who's right is if you take a small group of people, you show them something, everybody's going to explain it differently. Okay. If you see a car crash and you have multiple witnesses, they're all going to explain something happened differently. There's going to be details that are different. So when you're talking about something as monumental as religion and the creator of everything, to assume that one person got it all right is silly to me.
absolutely.
To put all of your faith on one man is, and I don't mean Jesus by that, by the way. I mean people who wrote these books. Seems a bit odd. And then you get into where did these stories actually come from? So that I guess let's just jump into that, and then we can talk about that for a little while. I will preface this with a gigantic allegedly that when people talk about religion and humanity and stuff, you have one camp that's like evolution, right? So like Neanderthals, and we've been here for millions of years and stuff. And then you have young Earth creationists who say everything is 6,000 years old. And then you have people in the middle who might subscribe to like the younger dryas theory of that involves thinking that space and the cosmos is real and exists and stuff. But they subscribe to the younger dryas theory that 11 12,000 years ago there was a global catastrophe and we're basically a species with amnesia, and it took thousands of years for us to get back onto our feet. And then around, we'll say 5 6,000 years ago, you have this explosive bloom of just information and knowledge and technology and everything that happens in Sumeria, right? Ancient Sumeria. And people will point to that as that's where mathematics was created. That's where a lot of science was created. But also that's where the first foundational elements of what we know as Christianity were created in the ancient Sumerian texts in their cuneiform tablets and stuff. So people don't realize though that is not accurate. There's a group called the Proto-Indo-Europeans who existed allegedly. I will say, I'm not making any claims, but allegedly a couple 3,000 years prior to the Sumerians, and they existed in Russia close to the Black Sea. And they have a creation story that, forgive me, I should have looked this up beforehand, but basically, in the beginning, there were two beings created. These two beings were androgynous beings. They were neither male nor female. They were just created with the ability to then create within them. And at the same time, there is a sacred cow created that they used for sustenance. They milked it, they drank the milk. And so one of these beings ends up killing the other. They're brothers. They're androgynous, but they're, for the sake of simplicity, they're siblings. One of them kills the other because he wants to rule, and then he creates the first man. So I look at that and I immediately go, well, there's a parallel with Cain and Abel. Right? But this is allegedly 8,000 BC that these people existed in modern day Russia. So if you look at how that story then kind of shifts and morphs, you get a couple thousand years later, now you're in Mesopotamia, and you have the Sumerian pantheon coming into existence. And if people don't know about the Sumerian pantheon, that's where we get the term the Anunnaki. That has been hijacked by modern truthers in the UFO community and stuff. But at its core, that was their pantheon of gods back then. And all it means is basically beings from the sky. The A-N, the on, means the heavens. So it's beings from the heavens. And within that pantheon and that creation story, you have kind of the same thing. You have Anu, who is the supreme deity in the heavens, right? Like he's the top guy. He has two sons who are Enlil and Enki. These two sons do not get along. Enlil is supposed to be given lordship over the creation, and he's the sky god, like he's the god of the wind and sky and everything. And then Enki is the god of the underworld, which is our plane of existence. It's our realm. It's the earth. It's the dirt, right? That's what they considered the underworld back then. So Enki and Enlil do not get along. Enlil is often depicted as Yahweh is depicted in the Old Testament, very tyrannical, requires constant worship, requires sacrifice. The parallels are insane between Yahweh and Enlil. And then Enki is the wisest of the gods. He is the actual creator of the first man. It was his creation. He is in the Enuma Elish. He is the one who tells the character Atrahasis, who has parallels with Noah. Enki is the one that tells him of the incoming flood, which is going to be done by Enlil, because Enlil does not like that human beings were given knowledge and free will by Enki. So he's going to wipe them out. Enki stepped in and gave them knowledge. So there's a parallel right there between the snake in the garden giving, the knowledge of good and evil and everything. And so this kind of morphs and shifts. And then we get into Canaanite pantheon of gods. And this is where it gets interesting to me and will ruffle some feathers, because in the Canaanite pantheon of gods, it's wild that Christians don't know this, but most Christians will say that what do we use as a term for God? Like when we're using, we say El, right? El. So like, and in the truther community, we'll say, oh, the El eat. That means the people of God, because the El and then the eat. And if you break it down, um, that means the people of God, like the chosen people of God, is what the term El eat means. But El in the Canaanite pantheon, Yahweh was not God in the Canaanite pantheon or the Phoenician pantheon. Yahweh was a son of El Elyon, and El Elyon was the Most High God. He was the actual creator. And El Elyon had, it's either seven, I think it's 70 children who he gave dominion of the earth to. He gave them each an inheritance, a geographical inheritance of the earth and the people within those boundaries. So Yahweh was a minor storm deity originally. His voice was like thunder, right? He was a minor, like an elemental storm and war deity. He was given, and this is literally in the Bible.
Yeah, yeah.
This is in the Bible. It's not just, what I'm saying. It's right there.
Yeah, it's described.
So he was given the lands of Israel. That was his inheritance here on the earth. And so
those were his chosen people.
Those were his chosen people, because that was his geographical allocation of land. That was his kingdom that he was given here on earth by his father and the creator, El Elyon.
So he didn't even choose those people. They were chosen for him.
No. And it says this in the Bible. It says that they chose lots. And that was his inheritance. Yahweh's inheritance was Israel and the people of Israel. So right there, I see big red flags in religion, because first off, nobody wants to talk about these things. Second off, if you bring it up, there's always, I don't know how to describe it. It's like I've asked questions before and I've gotten answers that almost feel like it's shutting my brain off. Like your brain is having to do a hard reset because it can't handle the amount of mental gymnastics it takes to believe the answer. So I find that odd. But yeah, so anyways, so the Canaanite, who you're praying to, Yahweh, at least in Canaanite creation myths and their pantheon of gods, was not even the creator. He was a minor storm deity. And within the Canaanite pantheon, he wasn't even really that well liked. That's, to me, that warrants further investigation. Because if you're giving your entire spiritual well-being and future and placing it in the hands of somebody, would you not want to know who that somebody is and the history on them? So then we can also go into, oh, there's more. So we could go into like Old Norse mythology, right? So you have, everybody knows like Odin and Thor and Loki and Freya. Odin is the father. He's not the creator. He's not the creator of everything. He's just one of the people. And then he has Thor as a son, and Thor is a storm deity. There's a theme here with storm deities, okay? In Sumerian, Enlil, who is the tyrannical and often assumed, outside of dogmatic Christianity, often assumed catalyst for the God of the Old Testament, who he ended up adopting, or the God of Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, ended up adopting all of the attributes of Enlil, and then they said that was God. He has a son named Marduk, who is a storm deity, and ends up taking the lordship from Enlil and ends up being the ruler. Um, I said Norse. In Egyptian mythology, again, people think that Ra is the ultimate creator deity. Ra is not the creator deity. He is not the oldest deity. You have far older deities, gods. One of them is Ptah, Ptah, who was one of the first five celestial deities created. And Ra, again, started off as a minor storm deity. Ra was not well known. He was one of over 2,000 gods in their pantheon. Ra came to such high status because there was a cult of Ra in Egypt. And over the course of like 1,000 or 1,500 years or something, they waged war on other tribes and beat them. And then the idea of Ra being the supreme deity grew until the point that he kind of was, like there was a good chunk of time where Ra was the most widely accepted, all powerful deity. But again, he was one of 2,000 at the start. So then Ra has children, right? He has Osiris and he has Set. Set ends up killing Osiris because he is jealous of him, because Osiris was giving dominion over the earth, or over, at least their allocated geographical area, right? Osiris was the patron deity of Memphis, Egypt. So then Set kills Osiris. So you again have two siblings. One of them kills the other because he's jealous. In Egyptian myth or religion, Osiris ends up being brought back to life by his wife, and then his son Horus ends up defeating Set and ends up ruling. But within all of these religions, we can talk about Greek and Roman as well. Again, the same exact thing. You have the creation, you have the primordial waters, and then creation happens. You have an ultimate creator, or the first being born out of creation, right? So in Greek, you have I think it's Uranus is the first being created, and then Uranus gives birth to the Titans, which are I think it's 12, it might be 14. There's 12 or 14 Titans born. One of them is Kronos, right? And Kronos learns that, again, Kronos is a minor deity, and he ends up going on a rampage, and he finds out that it is destined that his son Zeus will overthrow him and take control. Zeus is a storm deity.
Oh my gosh, that's so
funny. Kronos ends up eating all of his children because he's like, I'm not going to let this happen. And his wife ends up hiding Zeus in a cave and gives Kronos a boulder wrapped in like swaddling cloths and tricks him. So Kronos eats the rock and thinks that he ate Zeus. Well, Zeus ends up growing up, and then he ends up challenging Kronos, causes Kronos to vomit out all of his siblings that he had eaten. And then together they defeat Kronos. Zeus takes over control of everything, and now he is the god. He is the ruler.
Wow.
Within every single pantheon. And you can go down into Southern America as well. And when you talk about Quetzalcoatl and stuff, he is a storm deity. When you go to India and you read the Vimanas, there are storm deities there. When you go to Japan and read about their creator gods and then the whole pantheon that comes from that, there are storm deities that end up taking over. So these are questions that I ask.
Oh my.
How is it that everybody is kind of adopting over thousands of years the same exact ideas, the same exact creation ideas, worded differently and with different deities and different characters, but when you look at the attributes of what makes each character, it gets pretty interesting because you have in Sumerian, you have, as I said, Enlil and Enki are the two sons of Anu, the highest god. Enlil has a son named Marduk, who is a storm god, ends up taking over from Enlil. Marduk ends up ruling for however long. Enki has a son named Ningshita. Ningshita is as brilliant as Enki is. And then Ningshita ends up kind of being transmuted over millennia to become Hermes Trismegistus, and then he ends up being Thoth in Egyptian pantheon of gods. So you have all of these people that are kind of existing over millennia, and they morph and they change into different pantheons based on, you know, what that group of people believes in. But at the core of every single religion, Christianity included, what you have is a supreme creator who allocates land to his children and gives them small little kingdoms on earth to run how they see fit. And somewhere along the lines in Christianity, there was adopted a monotheistic belief that there is one God who created everything and no other gods exist. And that one God is actually one of the minor storm deities that is a child of the actual God. So I'm not making any claims with any of this. I'm just saying this is history. This is historical fact. This is what has been written down for thousands of years. It's all right there if you look into it. And the issue that I see is that people don't look into it. They pick up a Bible, or they pick up, you know, a Quran, or they pick up anything and they say, well, now I have all of the answers. And I know exactly who God is. I know exactly where he came from. I know exactly what's going to happen. I know exactly what happened in the past. And I go, do you ever stop and think that there's maybe a little bit of ego in that when you're making these very insane claims that you know everything? Do you think that there's a little bit of ego in control there? Because I don't know anything. I find it fascinating to learn about all of this, but there's so many parallels between the religions. Like in for instance, in Christianity, there's the Garden of Eden, right? And there are two trees there with fruit in them. And if you really read and study this, it would seem to be that if you are in the Garden of Eden and you are given the ability to eat of the fruits within the garden, you are blessed with eternal life. And I won't go into that because that's a 4-hour discussion in itself. But there are other people, and Sharon, you shared with me one that just breaks it down beautifully. There's a guy on YouTube, if anybody's interested. His name is Israel Anderson, who breaks this down. He has many incredible videos where he breaks all of this down using nothing but scripture from the Bible. So go watch those if you want to learn more, anybody. But so the Garden of Eden, right? And then in it is Norse mythology. What kept the gods, so the gods have traits in Norse mythology, just like humans, and they can grow old like humans as well. But what keeps them youthful and strong is they are given apples, golden apples, from a goddess named Eden, Idunn, Eden. So you have these parallels between religions that I think it's silly to not look at, not ask questions. So I'll pause there and let you guys say what you want, because that was a long ramble, but
no worries. It makes me think of how if everybody in all these disparate parts of the world are talking about the same thing using maybe different words or different names, could it be that it's not not a story of history, not something that actually physically happened? Because as I'm listening to you talk about some of these stories that I haven't necessarily heard, like vomiting out your children and then they're all okay, and then they go on to do other cool things. Like, first of all, him eating them was gross enough, but like him vomiting them out and them still being like able to live, to me that sounds like a myth, a story, a way to encapsulate some sort of truth maybe, or some sort of story that can be passed down. It doesn't sound like a historical document, in other words. So if that is not historical, but it's a story that's in many different parts of the world, but through different names and different I don't know, different books, different names, whatever, then it sounds like it's not like something that really happened. You know what I mean? So to me, I think of astrotheology and syncretism, which is like when you can have one name in one religion, another name in another religion, but they're mapping to the same thing, the same concept. And a lot of people will say that has a lot to do with the sky clock, the constellations, the stars, whatever, and what's going on in the stars, and how to write a story so that you remember what's going on in the stars and how you know where you're at with the stars.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I find interesting is, again, I'm not making any claims, and there could be a reasonable explanation for why there are so many different creation stories that are so close, but there are key details that are different. So, like in Norse mythology, for instance, you have the creation of, this realm happening, and you have the gods defeating the world serpent, right? And then the serpent ends up lying in a ring around the world, and that's what then contains the waters and creates Earth. And in Sumerian, you have and Canaanite and everything, but you have one of the first beings created is called Tiamat, and Tiamat ends up getting slain, and her body falls and creates the mountains and the earth and everything. So we're living on Tiamat, according to them. So you have this, and then you have this theme of serpents or dragons within every single pantheon, every single religion. There is a theme of dragons and serpents. South America, you have Quetzalcoatl. He was the winged serpent that showed up.
Yeah.
He showed up. You have obviously in Asia, you have China and Japan and all these places that worshipped dragons, right? You have them in India, hugely in India. You have them in Africa. You have them in Europe with all the old depictions of dragons being fought. There's a reason that these are in our collective conscious or subconscious. There's a reason that they have been depicted on cave walls and cuneiform tablets and scrolls for millennia. There's something to that. But there's all these parallels between religions, and I just go, what is the most likely thing that could cause this? So on the one hand, you could say there is truth to all of this, and as I mentioned earlier, you see a car crash, everybody has a different explanation of what happened because it happened so fast, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that could be a very plausible explanation. I mean, everybody could be trying to explain something that was so huge and complicated that they did so in the best way that they could, but they got different details wrong or different. That's always within the realm of possibility. But then I also go, another potential reason why there are so many things is because it is true, but then human beings tried to hijack that and use it as a form of control within organized religion. And I know that that will ruffle a lot of feathers, but if you read the Old Testament, there is so many things that are wrong with it that it becomes difficult to read, at least for me, without questioning every other word.
Oh
Because
my
even
gosh.
within the first 6 verses of Genesis, if you read the first verse of Genesis,
Oh
right, it
my
says,
God.
in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That is not what it actually says. If you go back to the original language that it was written in, it doesn't say in the beginning. It actually starts off saying, when God created the heavens and the earth. So the very opening line of the Bible gives the implication that there was nothing before God created the heavens and the earth. But what was actually written was, this is just a point that we're talking about, right?
Yeah. I've
It
heard
would
it said that it says in any beginning. Like,
Oh, that's interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. So even the very opening line of the Bible has the hand of man in it and on it. So then you go, how much of the rest of the Bible does? And we can, people who have been in this like truther world for any amount of time should know that within Canaanite and Phoenician, and then for a short period of time, I think like 1500 to 1000 BC, this was also worshipped in Egypt, but Baal or Baal, however you pronounce it, um, was again a deity, a storm deity, um, who existed a little bit further north than where Yahweh was worshipped. So Baal ends up. It's so complicated and confusing, and I think this is on purpose. So
Oh
it
yeah.
makes people not even look into it, right?
Hmm.
But Baal ended up I mean, he's in the Bible. You can read your Old Testament. He's mentioned however many times in the Old Testament. Um, but Baal actually translates to Lord. That's what his name meant. It was a title given to this deity back in the Canaanite, you know, times and geographical locations where they were. So they would say, as we say Lord, they would just say Baal. It was interchangeable, it was the same thing. So then you read through the Old Testament and you go, why does it say Baal in some places and then other places it says Lord, all capitalized as a title? And then you go back and you read the original text, allegedly, and a lot of those places where it says Lord, originally it said Baal. And so then they take that out and then they put Lord in. But again, ask these questions, people. It just says Lord. It doesn't say which deity. It just says Lord. Lord is a title. So you can say they put this title in to represent Yahweh, but Yahweh in himself is a storm deity, just like Baal, who ended up adopting a lot of the attributes of Baal, who was right in the same geographical area and intermingled within even the same communities as Baal. So you have and in the Old Testament there's even a point, and I'm sorry, I should have prepared for this and pulled the actual scripture, but there's I just read it about a month ago. So you have the God of the Israelites going around and fighting for them, right? It says that God wipes out armies in front of the Israelites and he brings them to victory and stuff. God, the God of the Old Testament loses at one point. He goes up against another army and their God, and they end up losing. Like he's defeated. So to me, I'm going, is that not a admission that there are other gods? because how could he lose if there's nothing else there? And I'm not making any claims. I'm just asking questions because this is stuff within the Bible. And again, within the Bible, it talks about how they drew lots.
Oh yeah.
For their chosen people and their chosen lands. It talks about Elohim is plural. I don't care. I'm so tired of the argument. I'm so tired of men saying, no, what they actually meant was, no, that word is plural. So when it talks about the Elohim saying, let's create man in our image, and it talks about
a group of people.
Yeah, it's a group. And, oh, well, it was actually the Trinity saying that. It literally never says that anywhere. This is the hand of man that I'm talking about that ends up being morphed and used as a mechanism for control amongst the masses. But yeah, Elohim is plural, and it talks about the divine council, and it talks about, drawing lots and getting their allocated inheritance from El Elyon, who, again, I will remind everybody, is a Canaanite deity. So when you claim to be a Christian and you talk ill about Canaanites and stuff, all of these people were Canaanite deities. Like, the Bible is an amalgamation of ancient Sumerian, Canaanite, Phoenician, Zoroastrianism. It's kind of this, like, they took bits and pieces of creation stories of different pantheons, different characteristics of different gods, lumped them all in with their chosen God, Yahweh, and then just kind of ran with it. And I'm not saying that the Bible is incorrect or correct. I think the Bible has so much wisdom in it, and it is fundamental for my personal existence. I read it, I love it. But I think where we get in trouble is when we say everything else is fake.
Yeah.
Everything else is demonic. Everything else is, there's a funny one in itself. Demonic, the actual meaning of the word demonic doesn't mean evil. It just meant spirit. Yeah. Originally, like, I think in Sumerian, it just meant spirit. Okay. It wasn't good or bad. It just meant something higher than humanity. It just meant spirit. So,
yeah, I've heard that it means messenger too. So, like, when you see it in like language of coding, like computer language, it's spelled Daemon.
Yeah,
but it's literally just it's a messenger.
Yeah, exactly.
An angel, if you will.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, and language and words have power. Everything within this realm is frequency. It's an oscillation of energy and noise. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
That's kind of a tangent in itself. But when people say, oh, you're trying to demonize me, it's like, I'm not. Yeah. No, I'm not. I just called you a dick. I'm not trying to put you above humanity. Like, I'm not.
It's just an elaborate dick joke, everybody.
Yeah. But yeah, I'll pause there. You guys go.
Yeah.
Going back to what you said about taking bits and pieces, it looks like somebody patchworked together bits and pieces from other religions. It's almost as if there was a council, the people who were quote unquote in control of the masses got together to decide what would work best. I mean, and then if you look at like the Council of Nicaea and the Council of Trent and all those things that the Romans did, which Christianity comes straight out of that. I mean, it's not even a, question. People will say, oh yeah, there was Saul Invictus and Constantine got together and there was this great battle and Jesus helped him win the battle. And then he created this whole thing. And there was like councils for, decades that they argued about these things and they put stuff in and excluded different things. But what I hear when you're talking, what comes into my mind is that this religion or all these different religions we're talking about, they could have been the slave religions at the time. If you take the concept of master and slave, where we talk about on this show, where master just means you're a master of your own mind, and therefore you're able to master others who are slaves to their own mind. So other people are just slaves and they go about and you can even look at it this way. We've talked about how we think this realm the spiritual realm we exist in is, I think it was Davin who said it, our astrologer friend Davin, who we've had on, shout out to him. He talks about how he thinks this universe is a story creation machine where people just create stories. And if you look at it, masters are the ones who create their own stories, and slaves are the ones who help create the stories of others instead of their own. So it looks like, to me anyway, there's just this way that people can cope or deal with their spirituality that the slave masters give them. And throughout time, it just has to be fixed to what's going on so it makes sense. So I feel like that's really what's going on with all this stuff. It's just, people who are in charge or whatever. And again, it's not a victim thing. It's not, nobody really put them in charge. They just allowed through their free will to let these people control them. They come up with a story for everybody because people don't want to make a story for whatever reason. Maybe they're just traumatized too much. They don't know their own power that they have to create their own story in this realm. So they have to go along with another one. And then they start to argue about this story, which is so hilarious. It's so inverted, because if we are here just to create our own stories, then you're just fighting about someone else's story when you could just be creating your own.
Yeah. Going back to what you were saying about the patchwork of the Bible and how it was written from many different stories of whether it was Sumerian or Zoroastrian or all these other different stories that got kind of merged into one. I've mentioned this before, but I had watched a video. I think it's Archaics being interviewed by some guy. I forgot who it was. But he, in the first 20 minutes, he breaks down, as he was reading the Bible, he had also been reading a lot of these other books about those different Sumerian gods and some of the other gods you mentioned. And he noticed how, and he saw the history too, because he read books about the history of religions and stuff like that. And he saw how basically the people of that country went into that area when they were in Babylon, and they were in the libraries taking from all those ancient texts and writing it into a story as if it were their own, and injecting themselves into the story as if they were the ones who were part of that story. So I thought that was very curious too. Not that there's no truth, like you said, not that there's no truth in the Bible, because it does have a lot of wisdom and truth, but I just find it funny that they wrote themselves into that story. And hey, maybe it was a noble thing for them to want to do that. They wanted to feel like they were writing their own story, I suppose, amalgamating it and taking from all different pantheons. And then they, they're like, this is us, this is our story or whatever. Hey, maybe there was something noble about that. I don't know. But I just find it funny that I used to think that it was just God, men wrote it down, and here you go. This is it. This is all you need to know. It's just kind of funny. But going also back to what you talked about, even at the beginning of the Bible, in the beginning, I mentioned this before, but when I first read the Bible, I was not when I first read it, but I was probably a teenager, and I had this desire, was I want to read the Bible from cover to cover, and because I want to understand, I want to understand what I'm reading. I literally got to, I opened page 1, and there I am. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. and the earth was without form and void. And I was like, I literally could not go past that because I couldn't even imagine what that meant. I'm like, how do you imagine a place that's without form and void? So I'm like, if I can't understand this, I probably can't understand the rest. And I just like gave up, like right on the first sentence.
Yeah,
First, second
totally.
sentence of the Bible. I was just like, I guess I ain't understanding any of this.
Yep. And it really is. It's a mishmash of other creation stories. There's literally a place in Psalms where I forget which verse it is, but there is a song to Yahweh that is literally originally about Baal. And it was taken from like 150, 200 miles north of where Israel was, and like 100 years earlier. And this was a famous song devoted to the worship of Baal. And they took it and made it about Yahweh, word for word. This is
That's
carved into stone to Baal.
hilarious.
And then you have a place in Psalm. I think, Brandon, what you said is 100% accurate about religions for the slaves. That's something that I was going to touch on. So that's a beautiful synchronicity right there. Is the times where I have been most willing to let go of my curiosity is when there's something going on in my own life that is has an element of fear to it, and then I succumb to that fear. And I find that very interesting. The last 3 years, especially with all of the chaos that's happened in the world, it almost feels like we need comfort beyond what humanity can provide. So we suspend. I don't know how to word this without making it sound terrible, but we suspend who we are and blindly accept things just to feel that comfort.
We basically indulge in cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. And it's interesting because when things are really good for me, I can't speak for anybody else. When things are good for me, I feel like I'm more appreciative of the creator. But when things are bad, I kind of zero in and focus on, like Christianity. Which I don't know what that mechanism is within me. But there's definite truth to it. And the interesting thing is, I'm going to take a short pause break and flash some books real quick because I had these lined up to show people just in case they want to read more about this stuff and get a history of it. But the last one you'll find funny. So the first book that I have is the Epic of Gilgamesh. Read this if you haven't. It's super short. This tells the story of Gilgamesh and Ziusudra and the flood and everything that Gilgamesh did after that. That's a fascinating book. That comes from Sumerian and Akkadian lore. The next one that I have, which is very interesting, is called The Bearded White God of Ancient America, The Legend of Quetzalcoatl. This is a great book. This talks about the bearded white god that came from the seas to South America. These two books are fascinating. Read them if you want understanding of Sumerian and how a lot of these myths came into being and the correlation that they have with stories within the Bible. The first one is called Wars of the Anunnaki. This is by Dr. Chris Hardy. It's a fascinating book. It goes basically, this is an explanation of what's in the Sumerian cuneiform tablets, a good portion of which are actually stories of the Bible, just with way more detail. It actually explains what happens, like who Abraham was, like what his actual campaigns of war were, all of these things that were actually written down on these tablets. Another one, again, by Dr. Chris Hardy. This is called DNA of the Gods. the Anunnaki creation of Eve, and the battle for humanity. Some of this stuff gets into space and stuff. So if you don't believe in that, just, whatever. But the actual stuff that she's citing from back then is brilliant. And then if I could recommend one book, it would be from Michael Tellinger, who is a brilliant researcher from South America or South Africa, excuse me, who actually has been studying this stuff for decades. And he, along with his team, actually used some new form of like LiDAR, radar, something, laser radar, to map out the footprint of what was perfectly described as the House of Enki in South America from Sumerian, like literally the descriptions of it from the cuneiform tablets. He found the actual stone footprint of it buried however many meters under the earth, and they've been excavating and stuff. But he goes into Sumerian as well and all the creation myths and everything. And this book is called, funny you said that, Slave Species of the Gods.
Wow.
So he talks about slave religions and religion used as a mechanism of control and all this stuff. It's just fascinating stuff. But those are some books if anybody wants any fun reading. They are really fun reads. But what Brandon was saying was true. I think that we search for comfort to the point of suspending our curiosity and our intuition and common sense, honestly, at this point. And people can get upset if I say that. Go for it, because it doesn't actually cause any harm, and it just makes sense. Because if you look at the Bible as the history of man, what about every other man that didn't live within Israel or Egypt? Like what about what was going on in South America or Australia or greater, the Eurasian continent as a whole? What about the Americas? What about every island in between? Is their history not important? Was it not happening? Was there nobody just living there? And the only place that life existed a few thousand years ago was in Israel. Why is none of that important? And why is none of that true? Was God only present in the Middle East? Why is that? Why would you create a creation and then just let 90% of them go and not pay any attention to them if you're supposed to love them? These are very basic questions.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
And something I'd like to add really quickly too is that what was his name? There was a guy who wrote a lot about these about the ancient Sumerian cuneiforms and stuff, and he's associated with the ancient aliens theory as well. But he
Sitchin?
Yeah, Zachariah Sitchin. He saw this unit of measurement called a shar, and he just said that he thought it was a year, or he just basically assumed that when they talked about shars, they were years. But if you think about shars, and other people have done this research where they think that a shar was just a day, it was a turning of the stars. So when you take that into consideration, it makes it a lot more likely that it was actually humans that were doing this stuff and not like a god, maybe just other people, other men and women who had advanced knowledge, and they were maybe coming from another civilization that had been destroyed or something like that. And they were here, and then they had the men and women that were just the normal people running around who had no idea, and then they were the ones that become the slaves. Because if you think about it, I mean, and I know it wouldn't take long for me to talk about Dune, but in the Dune series, in that universe, way before the original Dune, there was a war between the machines and men, and there was this group of people called the Zen Sunni, which is hilarious the way they use religion. There was the Zen Sunni and the Zen Shiite, and they refused to fight on the side of mankind. They refused to fight at all because they were totally just against any kind of war. So they scattered, and then because of that, the other men and women used that as a justification to just use them as slaves. So they would go raid their planets in the book and grab those people up and take them on spaceships to other places to use them as slaves. It's really kind of mind blowing. It's like a parallel because they were just the common people living as like fishermen or like, and if you even see it in Dune, because 1,000 years later or whatever, when the first Dune book takes place, you have the Fremen, which are the ones that are the desert people, and they were descended from the Zensuni. And it's the same thing. They're just living like a regular, in accordance with nature, subsistence. So they're just like the natives. So if you think about it this way, if there was this grand civilization that somehow came to maybe there was a catastrophe that happened, something, who knows, a flood or whatever, and it ruined everything, but some people did survive, they would look at the natives as their slaves, basically. They would look at them and they would create these religions. It's definitely quite possible.
Hmm. Very interesting.
Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff in the Bible once you start actually researching it that is it begs a lot of questions. There's a again in the very beginning of Genesis says the earth was void and without form, and then the Spirit of God was on top of the waters, right?
Was moving over.
It's not what it actually says. It says that the wind of God.
Yeah, because that's what spirit is. It's breath. The wind of
So
God, the
that
breath of God.
Yeah, so what I'm saying though is that there again is another instance of the hand of man deciding what it meant when the actual original creation story said the wind of God, and the wind of God ties right back into storm deities. And so when you say when God created the heavens and the earth, it was void and without form, and the wind of God was on the waters. And in Sumerian, in their creation story, the waters and everything were man, I should have written this down. I just read this the other day. The original word for it, I think, was Tiam, which is Tiamat. So Tiamat falls, and it's literally in Sumerian, I believe, or it might be Canaanite. There's so many of them. I get so confused at times.
I know.
But in one of them, you can literally read it as the battle that is taking place between two deities, and the one of them ends up slaying Tiamat. It's the storm deity that ends up slaying the deity Tiamat, which then falls and creates the physical earth. So, again, it is just human beings wanting to understand things and then saying that they do, and then everybody believes them, which I think is funny. And I'll go into the reason that I find this stuff interesting is seeing what's happening today. So there's a huge you know blooming taking place in like Orthodox Christianity, right? And there's the argument that Orthodoxy is they've maintained the original religion better than anybody, is their claim.
Yes.
And that's fine. Like, I'm not going to say anything bad about it, because maybe that is true. I don't know. I'm not Orthodox. I've never researched it. Maybe they have retained all of the what's the word I'm looking for?
Traditions.
Yes, thank you. Maybe they've retained that better than anybody else. But then I go, that's fine and everything, and I have no problem with that. But where did the traditions come from? Why are the traditions there? Are we not going to talk about how they came? A lot of these things came from other places and other pantheons of gods and entirely different religions in themselves, because I find that pertinent and important. Like, this is what you're claiming to believe. And it seems like what happened at the beginning of time was there were all of these gods and these huge pantheons, and there were siblings fighting over, who was going to get to control what. I mean, if you read the Sumerian stories, it's literally siblings fighting. it is waging war across continents on each other to rule over certain areas that had resources or had, huge populations and stuff, all the way from South Africa up to Mesopotamia. They were fighting these wars back and forth. Um, so like, would you not want to know why all of this stuff ended up in the Bible and how it ended up in the Bible? Um, because I do.
Yeah.
I think it's important.
Yeah. And could it be allegory? Could it just be a story that allegorizes something that people wanted to remember and people wanted to keep in an easy format to remember? Stories are easy formats from, because like you were saying, again, what story did you just say that was just like that wouldn't happen in real life? Like,
Oh,
just like I said,
Cronus eating his children.
yeah, like, but there was something you just said, like, I don't know, like 2 minutes ago. But yeah, it's just like that. Like those kinds of things don't happen in real life. So could it be a story of allegory to encapsulate some kind of thing that you want to remember?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's very plausible. And then the other argument too could be it all did happen. And we're just in a very quiet part of time where nothing is happening. And that could in itself be a test of our discernment or our desire to seek truth and understanding and wisdom. Is not everything always has to be chaos. I think that if the point of this life is to learn and to grow, then it would make sense to have this waxing and waning of chaos and peace happening, so that you know you don't just learn in the chaos. If you can learn in both and find truth in both, then that's obviously much more valuable of a skill than just taking what's given to you and blindly accepting it.
Yeah. And a lot of this stuff comes down to us from word of mouth and from stories. Like what Sharon was saying, there's a reason why these stories last so long, because they're so compelling. And when people would embellish or maybe add to these stories, they could have been using symbolism. Like think about the air moving over the water. If you think about what air means symbolically and water means symbolically, it could be the ideas moving over the emotions. It's something
Yeah.
as simple as that. And then that's what created the earth and the realm that we live in.
Yeah. I love that. Very,
Yeah,
very, very deep.
yeah,
Totally.
that's great. There's other stuff too. Like if you look into India and you read in like Hinduism and you read about the Vimanas that were literal flying craft
Mm-hmm.
that they used to wage war. Again, sibling deities fighting these wars with these craft that would fly above the earth at like supersonic speeds, and they could go, from here to there 1,000 miles away in the blink of an eye and stuff. So
Yeah.
I see that, and then I see they talked about this in Sumerian as well. They had, flying craft that could go from here to there and they would fight and stuff. And I go, stuff like that. Again, I'm making no claims, but I find it interesting that this stuff was chiseled into rocks thousands of years ago if it didn't exist. And if it did, then where did it go? Why is it not here like it was then anymore? Um, it's interesting. And then, you can talk about UFOs and stuff. I've been researching that since I was a kid. I think most of it is, man-made, but there's definitely some stuff I can't explain. And I question, is that like a leftover remnant of what was going on then?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, it's interesting because like I like having these conversations with people like you because we can just ask the questions. We're not making claims or anything.
Mm-hmm.
I really just I'm making no claims about people, but the vibe that I get when I have super dogmatic interactions with people who aren't even willing to hear anything uh, is where I find the most difficulty in life, because I'm not telling you a random story. Like this was written down before your Bible was. Like these were carved into stone 1,500 years before your Bible was allegedly, the Old Testament was allegedly written. Like, why do you not want to hear about that? Does it not interest you? And I think that in itself is what causes me the most difficulty, is the fact that it doesn't interest people, because I'm such a curious person. Like I want to know what's going on, not from a place of ego, but just because it's so fascinating. Like we have this insane creation that we live on with beauty and imagination and joy and suffering and everything in between. And then you go, well, who made all this? You know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like you make me think of like when you say like having these conversations with people who aren't necessarily willing to listen. Maybe they're just very they have some tunnel vision going on and they just want to see things the way they want to see them. And I just think to myself too, like I'm not like I don't feel the need to like force people to see something the way I do, or like I used to. I mean, I've learned a lot. I mean, pearls to swine, all these things that, even the Bible says it, the Tao says it, those who speak don't know, those who know don't speak. But like I feel like there's a difference between the way I feel about the topics, and there's a difference in the way they feel about them. So there's this like openness, I feel like, to looking into such things like that. And I feel that when people want to argue with me, they tend to already feel like they're like, I know. And yet they may be like, yeah, I want to know more, or I want to understand, but they're not quite open to it. And I feel like it's fear, but I don't know. Could it be? I don't know.
Well, I think it has to do with the fact that people don't want to admit that they don't know, because then they lose control. I know even in my own life, I always felt like I was in control of everything. And the minute I realized that I wasn't in control, the only thing I am in control of is how I feel about something that happens. Like I'm only in control of the internal. The external isn't what I'm in control of. And it also reminds me of, was it like 3 years ago when I was trying to tell people about like Dr. Carrie Mullis and the PCR test, and they didn't want to hear it. It's the same kind of thing. Or you're telling people about like Waynel Sexton, like, guys, did you know about Waynel Sexton on CNN? You think this is real? And it's the same kind of stuff. And it's funny because a lot of people who call themselves quote unquote truthers, they always say that they're looking for the truth. But then the minute that you start asking questions with the beliefs that they have, solidified in their brain, then you start getting that same kind of look as if you were talking to somebody about covering their face back in, 3 years ago or whatever. It's all a pattern to me. And that's why I think I was able to ask these questions and expand my knowing of things and realize I don't, because I saw all these patterns everywhere. Science right now is basically a new religion. It's the same thing. You got the doctors wearing white coats. It's like all praise unto the scientists who know. It's the same thing. And it's funny because science is a wonderful thing, right? It's the study of things. That's what it's supposed to be. But then you get the dogmatic tenets behind it, and people don't want to stray away from them. They're like, all right, as long as it fits within my pattern, it's just like the trivia method that we talk about, the way of learning, where you have the input, or you have your data, right? And then you have the input of the data, and you like process it, and then you have the output, where it looks like it's kind of switched around, where you have the data, and then instead of processing it, you have somebody else's idea that you filter it through. You have this dogmatic idea. So if the data you encounter doesn't go through your filter, you just throw it away instead of seeing what makes sense to you and not, and then than having your output. It's the same
Yeah.
kind of, it's just inverted.
And that's what I feel is that Holy Spirit within you, that is your discernment, your intuition, your ability to say that resonates with me. That sounds, that rings true. You know, as long as I think as long as you're doing it with having removed a lot of your blind spots and a lot of your sacred cows and just being open to being wrong, to having been wrong, to like not knowing, like you were saying earlier, and not having any fear that whatever you come across is going to be okay.
Yeah.
The whole thing is interesting and it's based around fear. And that's what I wish people would understand is, as you said, it's like this inability to admit that you're not wrong. People people need to realize that the fact that there are different denominations of Christianity means that people are wrong.
Yeah,
Because I mean, like, if
exactly.
there's a
That's
choice, then there's a right and a wrong choice. And that's where
yeah,
I'm like, I'm not I'm not taking an oath to any of them at this point
right,
because like
right.
that's not who I am. And I also I'm okay with not knowing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's where the actual wisdom in this life lies. And I think that's where, call it whatever you want, heaven lies, is accepting that you don't know and then just appreciating the creation and being eternally grateful that you are able to experience this life and stuff. Like I have children, right? And seeing my child for the first time, and like that cliche thing where they reach up and they grab your finger, right? It is so it's such a paradigm shift in who you are as a person when you go like I'm just this dumb little kid, I'm not ready for this, and then they squeeze your finger and you go, oh shit, now I'm in control of making sure that this human being, this perfect little angel, is fed and sheltered and learns and is protected and all this stuff. It's such a paradigm shift that I go, there's no question in my mind that there is a creator. I should say that. I haven't said that here. I'm not like coming out as like agnostic or any atheist or anything, but like there's no question in my mind that there is a creator, and there's no question that I want to have that relationship with the creator and make the creator proud and do good here. My questions lie in how is burning and slaughtering a bunch of animals
Mm-hmm.
just because the creator says that he likes the smell of them doing good on this earth. Like to me, I would go, it would make more sense if we slaughtered those animals and then fed them to people who are starving and emaciated. That seems like a more logical thing if you're trying to do something good.
Yeah.
What good is it to go in and burn down all these cities and stuff? And the argument can be made that, oh, well, they were partaking in worshiping Baal and Asheroth, and they were having all this premarital sex and they had brothels and stuff. And I'm like, okay, you slaughtered them.
Yeah.
You
You committed
slaughtered them.
murder
You committed murder. You committed genocide. And
even
then you
worse
didn't
than
just
they
stop
did.
there. You then bragged about it in your book about how you broke down every wall, you burned every building, you burned every single tree in the area, you slaughtered every animal, and then you slaughtered all the children, but maybe you took some wives. It's to me, it's I don't even know what to say about it. It's like if you cannot see that and see a problem with it, or at least ask a question about it,
Mhm.
then I think there's more work that needs to be done within your own spirit because that is so wrong on every conceivable level to me, to do that to other human beings. You guys talk about, the golden rule and stuff, and that's that's how I try to live my life. I fail miserably at times. Um, but I do try to live that way because, you should be putting out into the world what you would want put onto you or your children. If you're a parent,
Mm-hmm.
if you can't fathom somebody doing it to your child, then don't do it to other people.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, these old religions they're wild. And I think that they are used oftentimes as a form of control. This endless fight between what's better, orthodoxy or Catholicism.
Mm.
I'm like, okay, is nobody going to talk about the fish hat? Are we not going to talk about the fish hat? Like, it's funny to make jokes and say it's a dick hat, but it's not. It's a fish hat. And that goes back to the god Dagon, who's a Sumerian god, um, and the worship of Dagon, the cult of Dagon that was happening. People don't understand that, like, those fish hats too are sometimes, if you look at Sumerian, if you look at Enlil and Enki, they have those hats on as well
Mm-hmm.
in Sumerian. And
Yeah.
Enki is the one who is said to have birthed, created, and sent out the seven wise sages around the earth to teach humanity laws of humanity and to be good to one another. So then you have accounts of these sages coming to South America. You have accounts of these sages coming to Europe in the
Wow.
old in like the old Britannia and stuff, when they had like druids and stuff there. These seven sages who would show up on the water with their fish hats and their white robes, their long beards, their sandals, and people have called them, the ascended masters that show up or whatever. But they were the seven wise sages who would show up. And it's said that Enki created them to teach humanity how to be good to one another and live by that golden rule. And I'm not taught that in Christianity. I'm not taught that in Orthodoxy. You're not taught that in Catholicism. And it's just funny to me. It's all this arguing. Orthodoxy will say, well, we've upheld all the traditions better than anybody else. And I'll go, that could be true. But then also, Catholicism is still wearing the fish hat. And that goes back 5,000 years. So, like, I don't know, continue arguing about stupid shit if you want. But, like, I'm trying to figure out why I'm here and how to be of
Yeah.
service to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Something that I thought about, and I think Brandon has probably mentioned this too, probably, but is that with like orthodoxy, the hard, like, I feel like it is like the hard right pendulum swing to the left things that are happening today, if that makes any sense. Like, things have gotten so terribly, horribly disgusting that people are like, can't do that. Okay, what's the complete hard right thing to do? And they'll swing to orthodoxy. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it shows you that it's an extreme, and it shows you that it's just a pattern of life, of this like swing this way, swing that way. So could it be that it's neither, but it's somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, and I want to make that distinction very clear as well. I'm not bashing Orthodoxy or Catholicism or anything. My whole entire family, um, extended family, are Catholic. I have many Orthodox friends. Um, I have many Protestant friends. I have many people of all walks of life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm not bashing anything at all. I see it the same way as you do. I think that there's this pendulum swing that happens, and that in itself is a form of control. So that in itself is using religion as a form of control, because the people who make these big decisions and kind of push humanity in certain directions know that eventually that swing will happen back over here to religion. So that in itself, these questions are things that people aren't asking. Like, if you believe in God and Satan, right, and this battle that is unfolding, why on earth would Satan create an environment that pushes so many people to go so extremely into Christianity and religion if that is literally his downfall? Why would he do that? It doesn't make any sense logically whatsoever. Um, and I don't have any answers for it. I'm again just asking the questions, but it doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. So it's either it's all so retarded that you will never be able to grasp it, or
Yeah.
it's so much more complicated that
And well,
arguing over stupid stuff doesn't make sense.
yeah, and I see it as like God wouldn't make things retardedly complicated for us, right? Um, but we do have to learn by experiences in our lives. We do have to encounter obstacles. We do have to encounter things because that's how we learn in this 3D realm, in this 3D lifetime. But I was trying to think about all this. I think it was yesterday. I kind of made a connection. I just thought to myself, like, um, religion is kind of like, because all like if when people say what religion are you, or religion, or they use that word, to me it's like a set of rules or traditions, right? And these are things that are laid down by other people, right? So again, when there's something that's laid down by someone else and you're just told do this XYZ 1 2 3, like there's no thought process of you going, okay, why should I be doing this? What does this mean? Why am I, like you're just like, oh, follow XYZ, okay, do it, right? That is not, to me, that is not true spirituality. So like that's why I don't claim a religion at all, because I am always going to question what someone tells me. And I'm going to use my own discernment. Like Brandon was saying, the what do you call the trivium, right?
Yep.
I'm going to go inside and I'm going to go, okay, what does that mean for me? Why am I doing it? Is that good? Is that really good for me? Is that good for other people? Is it harming other? You know what I'm saying? Like, what is the purpose? What is my intention? Right? It's like, that's what I boil it down to. And again, if it, for me, it's the golden rule. If it goes against the golden rule, then I'm not going to want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jesus was like practicing that golden rule more than anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Like he wasn't asking for sacrifices, he was not condemning entire populations of people. He was hanging out with the, observed slums and degenerates of society, trying to teach them a better way. And, it's the whole thing's interesting. Sorry, I'm just thinking about this on the fly as we're talking.
Yeah, it's all good. I do that
The
too.
whole thing is interesting because it's like, where do you see that happening in religion a lot today? I mean, we see a very earnest and enthusiastic um, desire for people to want to get you into their chosen religion. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't see a lot of what Jesus was doing coming out in people today, which is just being good to one another,
Mm-hmm.
and it's interesting because you have like, again, like we talked about earlier, and words having power, right? Like people need to understand that when you physically speak, you are engaging in, magic or creation or whatever, because that frequency is going out and it affects everything around you. And
Mm-hmm.
I was driving the other day and I was thinking about the I listen to only like classical music or, instrumental type music when I drive typically. And I was listening to this song and I was like, it was like a symphony piece, right? It was a symphony playing. And then I realized the word symphony is so close to the word sympathy, like having sympathy for somebody else. And then I
Mm-hmm.
started just going down this rabbit hole of like, what is a symphony? It's a group of people, and each of them has their own specific part to play.
Mm-hmm.
And when they come together and they play that together, they create this beautiful piece of music, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their frequency, they're each putting out different frequencies, and
But it has to be harmonious for it all to work.
exactly. But when it comes together, it's this piece that can bring you to tears. Like it can cut through all of the pain and trauma that you've been through in life and bring you to tears if you hear it, because it's so beautiful and there's so much just truth in it, right? And then the word sympathy, I think, is interesting because we're in a time right now where I think I've seen less sympathy for other people than any other time in my life. You know, people have become so calloused and apathetic to everything that is going on around them.
And
And
entitled too.
yeah, there's like an elitism that's happening with people, and like lines are being drawn everywhere. You know, like if you don't agree with me on this, then I can't talk to you, you know, or somebody that I like said they don't like you, so now I have to sacrifice years of friendship with you. And you know, religious divisions being drawn, and experimental, you know, gene therapy. If you got it, then you're good. If you didn't get it, you're bad, or vice versa. Or all these lines being drawn, but there's never any sympathy towards what other people are going through in their lives. And it's like when you become that calloused that you can't even connect with other human beings, it's like it would be like the conductor being handed every instrument that is in that composition and being told, here you go, make the music by yourself. You know, like that he can't play all the instruments at once. He can't read all the sheet music at once. So there's no way for that one person to create that beautiful piece of moving music. It requires a lot of other people working at the same time in tandem with each other. And I think that that's how humanity functions as well. We have to look out for each other, and that requires having empathy and sympathy and trying to think about what other people are going through. And I don't see a lot of that happening within religion. I see a lot of judgment, and I see a lot of hate, and I see a lot of ego. And that's why I kind of ask these questions is, you know, like, what is this all for? And it just kind of makes it honestly, like, I'm not bashing anybody. It just makes it more fun for me personally to go, oh, wow, here's 12 other storm deities that overthrew their father, who was the creator deity, and then ruled over the people and then handed lordship to their son. Here's 24 other pantheons of gods where this has happened, you know? It just makes the whole thing kind of silly to me. And at the end of the day, I think there's wisdom in everything, but I think a good portion of it is a distraction from your actual spiritual growth.
Yeah.
A good way for me to sum it up.
What's funny is you said conductor, because when you were talking about symphonies, I was thinking that basically what people are doing now with this organized religion is instead of playing the symphony, they're just worshiping the conductor instead of working on their own music to contribute. They're worshiping the conductor. And another thing I wanted to say is,
holy smokes.
Yeah, it's crazy,
I
right?
really like that.
Yeah, they're worshiping, like, who's your favorite conductor? You don't know, right? You know, but are you playing your beautiful music though when you do that, right? And then the other thing about this religion too, because we keep talking about how we don't want to demonize people's religion, is that I don't even have any hatred toward the religion or the process, because, you know, if you just reference the old South Park episode of when they got rid of religion, the people were just fighting about who was better atheist, like the correct way to be an atheist, and they were killing each other and going to holy wars over who was the better person
hilarious.
who didn't believe in God.
Exactly.
You know, so I feel
that's a great whatever metaphor, allegory, parody. What do you call that? Satire?
Yeah, that show was genius. And I think that's really where the problem lies in, is that this is a slave religion, or these religions are slave religions. And it's not about which one it is. It's about, do you want to be a slave or a master? Do you want to create your own story, or do you want to go along with the one that's being created for you? and it's up to you. You could do it if you want. It's fine. I just feel like in my own life, since I've decided to create my own story, it's been a much better ride, a lot less suffering, and bad things still happen and stuff like that, but it's just more, I don't know, more peaceful or whatever, I guess I could say. So,
If I can throw a caveat in there too, I also don't have a problem with religion. I know that most people might think that after this stream. I really don't. I think it leads a lot of people to a lot of spiritual growth.
Absolutely.
And even if it brings people, see, that's again the golden rule. Maybe some people are not prepared or able to ask these questions and really focus on them. Maybe there's like such deep seated trauma in them that all they need is a little bit of comfort to survive. And if they find that in religion, more power to them. I wish them the absolute best in life and healing, and um, for them to find whatever peace they need on this earth. Um, my issue is the intended control from the top and all of the damage that it has done to people. I think that's unfortunate, but then again, I don't. It's not my gig, like at the end of the day, it's not my gig, and that's what I always default to, which is I think what Brandon's saying. You can either let somebody else write your story for you or write your own. Is I can have an issue with something, but that doesn't mean that I have to wage a war against it.
Right.
Because now your story is inadvertently being written by that thing or that person or that group or that religion or whatever it may be. Your story is now being written by them. You're writing a chapter of your life that would not have existed if you didn't make the conscious decision to engage in trying to stop that thing. So obviously, if you're out and about with your family and somebody tries to attack you, then yeah, defend yourself, of course. But really take a look at life and what's going on and ask yourself, is this even worth me putting my energy into? Or, like if you have children, do I want my children to know that this was my hill to die on, that I was going to fight this specific thing? Or do I want my children to grow up and go, my dad was awesome. He created all of this stuff, and, he taught us so much. And that's what I'm trying to do, is just be the best version of myself. Find out what that version even is,
Yeah.
so that I can impart some wisdom onto my children with the time that I have left on this earth. But yeah, the whole fighting and stuff, I don't vibe with it at all. I have
Yeah.
nothing wrong with tradition. If you want to do traditions are wonderful. Traditions are what give us joy, because it is scary to live in this reality and be like, what the hell are we doing here? What is this? What are we supposed to do?
Yeah.
So traditions give us those little things to hold on to and help us come together.
yeah,
I would
it's the
just
fear
say,
of death,
yeah,
and
exactly.
it goes to step on here real quick. I'll bring up a Tolkien reference because in the when the men, I guess it's part of the Silmarillion or even it's part of the appendices to Return of the King, where they talk about the original Sea Kings and how they were given land by the creators and the elves were helping them, and they had this gift of death. Like men, when they came along as a species or whatever, their gift from the creator was death. They got to die and leave this realm, and that's how they looked at it. But then after time, they started to look at death as something bad. And I think that's what happened is most people in the society view death as something that's bad and it's going to happen, and they have to get all this stuff done and try to either live forever or whatever it is. So that seed of that fear grows into people needing to know. I have to know what's going to happen. I have to know that after I die, I'm going to heaven and everything's fine. And when you build on top of that, that means that if everything you're doing is causing you to go to heaven, if someone else is doing something different, then they're not going to heaven. Then they're the bad one. And then you could point the finger.
Yeah,
And instead of looking at yourself, you could point the finger at everybody else.
dude, that's the story of Odin. Odin found out that he was going to eventually die and be no more, right? And so he literally lives the rest of his life trying to find out how to stop that from happening. how to stop Ragnarok from happening. But it's like that was predestined. There's nothing that you can do about it. So he ended up going so far as like giving up an eyeball just for more wisdom, trying to find how to stop Ragnarok from happening. And there's no stopping it. Like everybody's gonna die. Don't live in fear of it.
My little Odin with
Hey,
his
there
one
we
eye.
go.
With his
Yeah.
one eye.
And it really does cause people to like make some stupid, silly decisions. Fear controls everything. People are fighting because they think if they get a certain piece of information, it's going to buy them a place into heaven. And it's like, treating people well would probably do that a lot more
Oh,
than a piece of wisdom would, or knowledge. And I want to bring up a quote too, since we're talking about Tolkien, this one real quick. It says, "The world is indeed full of peril, and in it there are many dark places, but still there is much that is fair. And though in all lands love is now mingled with grief, it still grows perhaps the greater." And I love that because we are in a time of despair merchants and doom merchants and people telling you that because they've decided that a certain way to live works for them, that if you don't do that, you're wrong or you are the enemy. There's a lot of judgment if you don't live your life according to how somebody else says that you should live your life, even if they're not living their life that way. Um, and just let it all go. That would be my advice, is just let it all go. Just be good to each other, like
absolutely.
be good to each other, be good to your children, raise them to ask questions and really think deeply about things rather than blindly
Obey and follow.
accepting authority and obeying, because the act of being able to think with common sense is much more valuable, I would say, than certain dogma, right? Because if you raise your child to just blindly follow and then they get mixed up in a wrong crowd, you're gonna have a lot harder time pulling them out of that than if you had given them the gift of being able to think clearly.
Yeah. Going back to what you had said, you guys were both talking about earlier, and like, you're talking about people that, you know, choose to go to church or go to, be a follower of a particular religion. I too speak to just myself. Like, just because I'm doing something doesn't mean that's your path. Like, I choose not to have a box put around me and limit my way of seeing things, because I feel like religion will box you in and say, oh, these are the only things that are okay. This is not okay. This is okay. And I can't allow that for myself, but that doesn't mean that you may think that's okay. And I'm cool with that. Like, everybody is on their own journey and their own path. And like if people, just like you were saying, some people need something like that, right? They need to have that a little bit of like rigidity or whatever, right? And like have some things, some bases, some rules to follow or whatever. And that's okay. For me, it's like, as long as it's in accordance with the golden rule, I'm cool. Like, no, I'm cool with you. But yeah, I mean, that may be what helps them see things, right? That may be what helps them. And even if they're just following Jesus, isn't that the best thing you can do? I mean, do what Jesus did.
Yeah, 100%. And try to remove, I would say, try to remove some of your ego from it. Um, Ego is important in some situations, but when it comes to religion, it's weird. It's like,
Mhm.
you guys have heard that argument before. I'm sure everybody has heard this argument that's going to be listening to this podcast, but for many years now, the argument about space, right? If you believe in space and you're talking about extraterrestrial life, what's the one argument that's always been made is it is so egotistical and self-absorbed to think that we are the only species in this great, vast, expansive universe, right? That is literally no different in my eyes than a certain denomination of a certain religion saying, like, we are the only right people. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I find silliness in both of it. I think that it's counterproductive to your spiritual growth and your understanding of what this life is and how to be of service to other people better. And again, like you said, you think that religion can box you in. There's truth to that. But again, for some people, right? Because not
Yeah.
everybody's different. For some
Right.
people, it can help expand them. Um,
Absolutely.
and that's a very important distinction I want to make is if it's working for you, then let it work for you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and again, as I said last time I was on the stream too, we were talking about diet and stuff. Sometimes something will work for you for a time and then you need something else too.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
let go of that ego. And if you really believe that God, that the creator is doing everything for a purpose, then maybe you having to take a step back and focus on something else is also for a purpose. I spent the last 3 years reading the Bible, and now I'm going back and I'm reading about other pantheons of gods and stuff. In no way does that affect my actual faith in a creator at all. It's just, I'm just looking at different stories, right? But I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people are scared to even do that because they think, oh, if I go back and I read a Sumerian tablet, then God's going to be angry with me. I would probably say not, making
Yeah.
no claims, but I would say
Yeah.
probably not. I think there are bigger things at play in spiritual warfare than you reading back on human history, trying to get a better understanding of it. So,
I think of it this way, like God looking down on me and going, "You're reading a book about something. Are you following the golden rule? Are you hurting anybody? No. Okay, you're fine. Read it.
yeah.
You know, read it. You're not hurting anybody."
Yeah.
But
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I have something to share when Brandon's done.
I was just gonna say really quickly what what he was saying reminded me of something I've heard. It's like when you get a splinter, you might use another splinter to get that splinter out, and then you could throw them both away. You don't have to like praise the splinter and carry it around. And sometimes you have a tool that you use, and then you don't need it anymore.
Absolutely. But yeah, so we're past the second hour, which is great. I had a wonderful time discussing all of this.
Yeah.
But I wanted to go back to and circle back to the very beginning when we were talking about the 70 nations and how they got their allotments. Because while you were talking about that, I knew I'd seen something about that before and I was trying to look for it. I don't think I found what I wanted to look for, what I was looking for, but I found something interesting. I found that you said it was written in the Bible. So I found some quotes and it's in a link that I can send, and I can probably link it as well in the description. But it is Psalm 82, 1 through 8, and it's Deuteronomy 32, 8 through 9. And I'll read them so that we can get some context. So it says, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly? This is a quote. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Selah. Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. That is a quote, and that's God taking his place in the divine council, allegedly talking to the gods. Psalm 82, 1 through 8. Now, in Deuteronomy 32, it says, in Deuteronomy 32, 8 through 9, it says, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance. Now, Most High was the creator, right? And you were saying that was the father of all the deities.
Yeah, in the Canaanite pantheon, that's El Elyon, not Yahweh.
Okay. So when and it says in the Bible, the Most High, it doesn't say Yahweh, right? It says, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. Oh my God. I'd seen this before. This is the quote I was looking for. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob, his allotted heritage. The Lord's portion. Notice
That
it says,
literally reads God divvied up the geographical location, and where it says Lord, that's interchangeable with Baal.
yeah.
So it says Baal's people were Jacob in his inheritance.
Yeah. And it's differentiated from the Most High.
Correct.
Note
Correct.
in this scripture.
Yeah.
It doesn't say when Yahweh gave the nation to the inheritance, blah, 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 then Yahweh's portion. No, it says when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, but the Lord's portion, Yahweh's portion.
Yeah. And right there where it says he took his throne as the judge in the divine council, that literally is in Egyptian and Sumerian and Canaanite and everything as well. Osiris ended up coming down and being the judge of the dead. Enki was the judge of the dead. All of these people were given the role of being a judge of the people. So but the important distinction there is they were given that role.
Wow.
They had to be given it by somebody.
Fascinating. All fascinating stuff.
And I'll end this with saying, because we've touched on Jesus, but we haven't talked about Jesus. Personally, I believe that Jesus is real. I can't say what he was, but what sounds right to me and what I've read many things about over the years is that he actually is from the Most High, like from the Creator. And he came down to, ironically, dissolve a lot of these horrific religious practices that were taking place towards other deities that were claiming to be God. So, and that there's evidence for that too, between the differentiation between the Levitical priesthood and then the order of Melchizedek and stuff. And that's a whole nother show in itself. But I think that, for me, at least, Jesus, I believe, is real. And I'll say that because there's no emotion invoked in me whatsoever when I think of Alexander the Great. But when I think of Jesus, like, there have been times where I've wept, and like, I think that that's an important distinction. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, could it have been that he was sent here to tell the slaves that they don't have to follow the slave religion?
And he literally did at times. Like he said, nobody's seen my father. If that's what if that's what you're praying to, then you're not praying to my father. I mean, I think that people really pick and choose what they want out of the Bible. But if you read it at face value, what he's saying is he comes from somewhere else, and came to remind people, at least in my opinion, what's actually important, which is treating each other well and living by that golden rule and being selfless. So
love that.
100%. Awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on and letting us pick your brain and sharing all the ideas about all this stuff, because this is like basic oversharing stuff. We love to talk about all these different things, division and all this stuff. We're just kind of getting to the roots of some of this stuff, where division and how it's created and what it means, and the futility of it all. It's like, it's just in our minds, it's a waste, really. You could be creating your own story. But speaking of creating your own story, where can people find you if they'd like to find you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. Woodshop the Wise is my handle there. It's not an egoic thing either.
I made the name up, so it's fine. It's fine.
You made it up, and it was like a callback to Tolkien, and then I found irony in it because I am so dumb in so many areas that, like, it's just a funny, ironic name to me. But you can find me there if you want to shoot me a DM or anything.
Plus, it's alliteration.
Yeah.
Woodshop the Wise.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a silly name. But But yeah, just hit me up on there, or just, throw a comment underneath this video and I'll see
Awesome.
it. So
All right. Well,
Sweet.
everybody, we'd like to give a shout out to the chat. Thank you guys for hanging out. Every time we premiere these, it's usually Thursday nights at 8:33 p.m. We hang out in the chat. We have a good time and we have zero tolerance. Sharon and I are like good cop, bad cop. She'll kick you out of there in a minute. So I love it. And as our great friend Joe, who's been on the show before, says, it's the only chat on the internet that doesn't want to make him kill himself. So gotta love Joe. And and you can find more of us at morelawsmoreproblems.com. Click on the Over Sharon tab and you can find us. We're on YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you find great podcasts. We're the best. We keep telling you. And if you'd like to support us, just like this video, subscribe, share it around to people you think might benefit. Don't try to woke rape anybody. Obviously this isn't for everybody. We're not trying to get famous over here. We're just asking the tough questions that nobody else wants to ask. So thank you guys so much as always for checking out our show this week. And what do we say to the good people, Sharon?
That once you start oversharing,
Then you totally stop being a Karen.
that's right.
That's right. All right, guys. We'll see you next week. Take care. Later.
thanks, guys.
Thank you.